The night the silence began, Adaeze Okonkwo was on her knees on the cold concrete floor of St. Michael's Parish, her hands trembling as she gripped a crumpled hospital letter, and outside the small chapel in Enugu, thunder cracked so violently that the stained glass windows rattled in their frames, and in that same instant, her phone buzzed with a call she had been dreading for 3 days straight. She didn't answer. She couldn't, because the voice she needed to hear most right now wasn't her sister's, wasn't her pastor's. It was God's. And for the first time in 11 years of faithful service, of tithing when she had nothing left to give, of singing in the choir every single Sunday even after her husband walked out, for the first time, heaven felt like a locked door. "Lord," she whispered, her voice cracking against the empty pews, "why won't you speak to me?" Nothing answered but the rain. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 days earlier, everything had been different. Adaeze had walked into St. Michael's with her head high, a woman known throughout the parish for her unshakable faith. She was the one other women called when their marriages fell apart, the one who prayed over the sick at the community clinic on Ogui Road, the one who could quote scripture the way other people quoted song lyrics. Her faith wasn't quiet. It was loud, visible, the kind that made people nod and say, "That woman really knows her God." But that morning, Dr. Chukwuma had called her into his small office at the clinic where she volunteered, his face unusually still. "Adaeze," he said gently, sliding a folder across the desk, "I need you to sit down." She hadn't understood the words at first, the specific name of what was growing inside her, the timeline the doctor spoke in months instead of years. She only understood the look on his face, the same look she had given to 100 grieving families herself. That night, she prayed harder than she ever had. "You've never failed me," she said into the darkness of her bedroom, tears soaking into her pillow. "You brought me through my divorce. You provided when I had nothing. I know you hear me now." She waited for the familiar warmth, the quiet inner voice she had always trusted to guide her, the peace that used to wash over her like sunlight through a window. It didn't come. The next morning, she prayed again, and the next. Each day, the silence grew heavier until it felt less like an absence and more like a presence of its own, cold, deliberate, suffocating. Her best friend, Ngozi, noticed the change first. They sat together at Ngozi's kitchen table, steam rising from 2 untouched cups of tea. "You've been different," Ngozi said carefully. "Ever since Tuesday. What happened?" Adaeze hesitated, her fingers wrapped tight around the warm cup. "I found out I'm sick, Ngozi. Really sick." Ngozi's hand flew to her mouth. "Adaeze, that's not even the part that's breaking me." Adaeze cut in, her voice shaking. "I've prayed every single day. I've begged. I've cried out like I've never cried out before in my life. And God has said nothing. Nothing at all. Like he's turned his back on me exactly when I need him most." "Maybe he's just testing your patience," Ngozi offered softly. 11 years, Ngozi. Adaeze's eyes glistened. 11 years of serving him faithfully, and this is when he goes quiet. "When I'm dying." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Ngozi reached across the table and took her friend's trembling hands. "Then we keep praying, together, until he answers." But even as she said it, doubt had already crept into Adaeze's heart like a thief in the night, a doubt that whispered louder each day, "What if he never answers again?" By Sunday, Adaeze sat in her usual pew at St. Michael's, but something in her had shifted. She watched Pastor Emeka preach about faith and endurance, watched the congregation raise their hands in worship, watched Ngozi sing with her eyes closed in total surrender, and for the first time in her life, Adaeze felt like a stranger in the very place she called home. After the service, she lingered behind as the last worshippers filed out, until it was only her and the empty chapel and the flickering candles at the altar. She walked slowly toward the front, knelt down exactly where she had knelt 1,000 times before, and this time She didn't ask for healing. She didn't ask for a miracle. She asked one single question, the only one that mattered anymore. "If you're still there," she whispered into the silence, "please, just say something, anything." And in the stillness that followed, something moved in the shadows near the vestry door. A figure she had never seen in this church before, standing motionless, watching her. Adaeze froze. The figure took one slow step forward into the candlelight, and Adaeze's breath caught in her throat. It was an old woman she had never seen before, not from St. Michael's, not from any church she'd ever attended in Enugu. She wore a simple wrapper, the kind elderly market women wore, and her eyes carried something ancient, something that made the hair on Adaeze's arms rise. "You've been asking the wrong question," the old woman said quietly. Adaeze scrambled to her feet. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "My name is Nkechi," the woman said, unbothered. "And I heard you, not because I was hiding, my daughter, because your voice carried further than you think." Adaeze wiped her eyes, embarrassed to have been seen so broken. "I don't need company right now. I need answers." "Then let me ask you something first," Nkechi said, lowering herself slowly onto the front pew. "When last did you sit still enough to actually listen? Or have you only been talking?" The question struck Adaeze like a slap. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. To understand how Adaeze had arrived at this moment, one had to go back nearly 4 years, long before the diagnosis, long before the silence, to the year her husband, Obina, packed 2 suitcases and left their modest home on Independence Layout without so much as a goodbye note. She remembered standing in the empty bedroom, staring at the bare hangers in the closet, feeling a grief so total it seemed to swallow the walls around her. In that season, prayer had been the only thing holding her together. Every morning at 4 a.m., she rose before the city woke and cried out to God in the darkness of her living room, and every single time she felt him answer, not in audible words, but in a peace too specific to be coincidence. A scripture would surface in her mind exactly when she needed it. A stranger would say the exact sentence she needed to hear. Doors would open the moment she thought all was lost. That season had built something in her, a certainty. She believed, fully and completely, that faithfulness always produced a response. That if she served long enough, prayed hard enough, trusted deep enough, God would always, always answer. So when the diagnosis came, and heaven went quiet, it wasn't just frightening, it felt like betrayal. "I don't understand," Adaeze said to Nkechi now, her voice raw. "I did everything right. I never stopped believing. Why would he choose now, of all times, to disappear?" Nkechi's eyes softened. "Tell me, in all these years of talking to him, how many times did you simply sit in front of him and say nothing at all? Just stayed?" Adaeze opened her mouth, then closed it. She searched her memory and found only noise. Years of asking, praising, pleading, singing, but never simply sitting. "There is a difference," Nkechi continued, "between a God who has stopped speaking and a heart that has never learned to listen in silence. Sometimes he is not absent, my daughter. Sometimes he is waiting for you in the quiet, and we run past him searching for thunder. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. Adaeze left the church that night unsettled, Nkechi's words looping in her mind, like a verse she couldn't shake. Over the following days, her condition worsened. She grew weaker. Her hands shook when she tried to hold a cup of tea, and the hospital visits multiplied. Ngozi stayed by her side through every appointment, holding her hand in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and fear. One evening, after a particularly brutal round of tests left Adaeze collapsed with exhaustion on her living room floor, she finally broke completely. "I can't do this anymore," she sobbed into the carpet. "I can't keep pretending I'm strong. I can't keep pretending he's listening when everything in me feels abandoned." Ngozi knelt beside her, holding her shaking shoulders. "Adaeze, look at me. You are not alone in this." "Then where is he, Ngozi?" Adaeze's voice cracked into something almost angry. Where is he when the doctors use words like aggressive and limited time? Where is he when I can barely stand to brush my own hair in the morning? I gave him everything, and he gave me silence in return. The words echoed off the walls of the small apartment, and for a moment, neither woman spoke. Outside, the Hamatan wind rattled the window shutters, and somewhere down the street, a generator sputtered to life with a low growl that seemed to underscore the heaviness in the room. Days passed. Adaeze stopped attending choir practice. She stopped answering Pastor Emeka's calls. She sat for hours by her window, staring out at the red dust settling over Independence Layout, wondering if the woman named Nkechi had been real at all, or simply a fever dream born of exhaustion and grief. It was on the worst night, the night her fever spiked so high that Ngozi had to rush her to the emergency ward at 2 a.m., the night the machines beeped in rhythms that terrified her more than any sermon on judgment ever had, that Adaeze reached the very bottom of herself. Lying on the hospital bed, tubes taped to her arm, she stared at the ceiling tiles and whispered the most honest prayer of her entire life. "I don't have the strength to convince myself you're still there," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't have the strength to perform faith anymore. If you're real, and if you're silent, then I need you to meet me in that silence, because I have nothing left to bring you but this." She closed her eyes, too weak even to cry, and for the first time in weeks, she stopped fighting the quiet. It was in that stillness, stripped of pretense, stripped of performance, stripped even of hope, that something shifted. She stopped praying with words. She simply lay there, exhausted, wordless, and let the silence hold her instead of fighting it. And in that stillness, something rose in her chest that wasn't an audible voice, but was unmistakably real, a memory, vivid and sudden, of her grandmother back in the village telling her as a child, "God is not only found in the storm, Ada. Sometimes he is the stillness after it." She remembered her grandmother's small mud brick kitchen, the smell of firewood smoke, the old woman's calloused hands gripping hers as thunder rolled outside. "You are afraid of the silence," her grandmother had said then, "because you think it means hers. He has left." But the deepest roots grow in the dark, where no one is watching, where nothing seems to be happening at all. Lying in that hospital bed decades later, the memory hit Adaeze like a wave crashing over dry ground. She sat up slowly, her cheeks wet, her chest heaving. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt accompanied, not by an answer to her illness, not by a miracle, but by a presence that had apparently been there the entire time, waiting for her to stop shouting long enough to notice it. The following Sunday, against Ngozi's gentle protests that she should rest, Adaeze insisted on returning to St. Michael's. She found Nkechi again, sitting quietly in the same pew, as though she had never left. "I think I understand now," Adaeze said, sitting beside her. He didn't stop speaking. "I stopped listening long enough to hear how he speaks." Nkechi smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "Faith is not the absence of silence, my daughter. It is trusting the one who is silent, even when you cannot feel him, because trust that only survives on constant answers was never trust at all." "It was transaction." Adaeze nodded slowly, tears sliding down her face. Not tears of despair this time, but something closer to relief. "So, what do I do now? The sickness is still here. The fear is still here." "Then carry them both," Nkechi said simply. "The fear and the faith. They can sit in the same room. What matters is which one you feed." If you've made it this far into the story and it's speaking to your heart, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling us one thing you're still trusting God for, even in the waiting. Adaeze's illness did not vanish that day. The tests, the treatments, the uncertainty, all of it remained. But something inside her had changed permanently. She began each morning not by demanding, but by sitting, not by filling the silence with noise, but by letting it teach her. She returned to the choir, softer now, less certain of the words but more anchored in the one behind them. She returned to the clinic on Ogui Road, sitting with the sick not with easy answers this time, but with quiet company. the same gift Nkechi had once given her. Weeks turned into months. The treatments continued, brutal and draining. And there were nights when the old fear crept back, when Adaeze found herself once again on her knees on that same cold floor, whispering into what still sometimes felt like nothing. But each time she remembered to stay, to not run from the silence, but to sit inside it, the way her grandmother once had, the way Nkechi had shown her. Then came the appointment that Ngozi would later describe as the day she saw a miracle with her own eyes. Dr. Chukwuma stared at Adaeze's latest results in stunned silence of his own, flipping through the file twice as though the numbers might change if he looked hard enough. "This is unusual," he said carefully. "The progression has slowed dramatically. In some areas, it's reversed. I don't have a clean medical explanation for this." Adaeze didn't cry out in triumph. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to the same silence that had once terrified her, because now she understood it wasn't emptiness. It never had been. She looked for Nkechi one final time, wanting to share the news, wanting to thank her properly, but the old woman was nowhere to be found. Pastor Emeka, when asked, said he had never known anyone by that name in the parish, and no one else in the congregation remembered ever seeing her. Adaeze chose not to question it too deeply. Some visitors, she decided, are sent for a single season, and their leaving does not undo what they left behind. Months later, standing at the front of St. Michael's on a Sunday when she was asked to share her testimony, Adaeze looked out at a congregation full of familiar faces, some radiant with faith, others clearly carrying their own silent battles behind polite smiles. "I used to believe that a quiet God was an absent God," she told them, her voice steady now, in a way it hadn't been in over a year. "I used to think that if I couldn't feel him, hear him, or see him move, then he wasn't there at all. But I have learned that silence is not always rejection. Sometimes it is an invitation to stop performing, stop demanding, and simply stay. To trust him, not because he always answers the way we want, but because of who he has already proven himself to be." She paused, scanning the room, her eyes landing briefly on the empty pew near the vestry door, where she had once knelt alone in the dark. "If God feels silent in your life right now," she continued, "I am not here to tell you that silence means he has abandoned you. I am here to tell you what an old woman once told me in this very building. The deepest roots grow in the dark, where no one is watching. Stay there, don't run from the quiet. Sometimes, on the other side of it, is the very voice you've been waiting to hear all along." If this story moved something in you tonight, we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and one season in your life when God felt silent but was still working behind the scenes. Give this video a like if it blessed you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss the next testimony of faith we bring to you. Thank you for staying with us till the very end. We'll see you in the next